Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for such an insightful session. I'd now like to invite again on stage Dr. Murtaza Saeed, who's the acting global head of ecosystem development and climate economics at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, to deliver the closing address for this session.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me begin in the name of the merciful Lord of all mankind and of all the worlds. It's a very hard thing to follow such an amazing list of speakers. I really enjoyed the movie as well from Nehal, and Iram waxed lyrical about a topic that is very difficult to actually present comprehensively. And of course the panelists were superb as well. So what I'll do is actually give you a perspective from the AIB side. We have just released a report last week on water. And what I'd like to do is zoom out a little bit and talk about water from a sort of a more systemic and less Pakistan-specific angle. I think it's important to keep that perspective in mind. And I hope you will forgive me, even though I'm an ex-central banker and an IMF guy and also an AIB person now. I will, having been inspired by the movie and also by Iram's remarks, I'll say a little bit about a book that I really like at the end. And it's a book that I read about 20 years ago. It's about the Indus River. It's by a very talented writer called Alice Albinia. It's called Empires of the Indus, The Story of a River. And it's a beautifully written book, a book that I would recommend you all to read. It talks about how the Indus River has been the cradle of civilization for 5,000 years and how it's gone through ups and downs, and I think it's really worth looking at as well. I also cannot help but be reminded today of my first boss, which was a person called Mehboob ul-Haq, who some of you might remember, some of the older people in the audience in particular. Dr. Haq was the most inspiring boss you could hope to have as a sort of a person who was just out of college. He was a finance minister of Pakistan, but he was much more than that. I think he was probably Pakistan's most brilliant economist, and someone who taught us that behind these cold sort of figures, statistics, is always a human life. And he came up with something called the Human Development Index, which was fantastic work, and partly for which Amartya Sen won a Nobel Prize. And unfortunately, Dr. Haq had passed away by then. Otherwise, I think he would have been a contender potentially as well. But let me talk about this report for a few minutes. If you could go to the next slide, please. Next slide. If we could move the slide, please. Okay, great. So let me give you my key messages up front. I mean, the institution for which I work now, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is based in Beijing. It's a new multilateral development bank. It's been around for 10 years. And we pride ourselves in thinking about infrastructure and infrastructure investment in a very holistic way. We think about infrastructure for tomorrow. So infrastructure that is clean, infrastructure that increasingly incorporates nature. And we've begun thinking a little bit about how to think of nature as infrastructure in the last few years, including mangroves, including tree restoration, and how to use that as much as possible as opposed to grey infrastructure, which is typically very polluting. My third key message is that, as the panelists also mentioned, water is not just a sectoral issue. It's actually increasingly recognized as being a global, interconnected problem. And in fact, water can be thought of as infrastructure, as I will show you in my slides. But unfortunately, it's not managed like an interconnected infrastructure system at all. It's very local. The solutions, the problems are dealt with in a very sort of fragmented way. And that is not the way I think that we can solve our water problem as a species. The fourth message is that unfortunately, this global water cycle that we all depend on, and which the Indus River is part of, is increasingly being destabilized by climate and land use. And in fact, water risks are becoming increasingly macroeconomic risks as well as political and social cohesion risks. But unfortunately, as I will show you, it turns out that poor countries that are water stressed, like Pakistan, are actually net virtual water exporters. The things that we export tend to be very water intensive. In our case, in particular, rice and cotton. And this is a very perverse thing that's happening. We already are very short of water, but it turns out that the things that we export are very water intensive. And at the same time, overseas development assistance that is targeted towards water is declining. So we are caught in a sort of a bit of a catch-22. I will also show you that, of course, the Himalayan glacier melt is a major global flashpoint, and it has severe cross-border spillovers because the Himalayas nourish not just Pakistan but several countries in the region. And finally, I'll argue that to deal with these problems, to make sure that the global water cycle remains robust, we will need not just investments in hard infrastructure, but also in soft infrastructure, in particularly in terms of improved governance and data collection, as Professor Fogaza also talked about. We can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so just to set the context, the global water cycle is actually a very beautiful thing. It consists of water first evaporating into the atmosphere, then this condensation that happens, you get clouds that form, you get precipitation that brings that water back down, and then you see that water making its way through the sort of land mass. It sort of moves, it's called, the technical term for this is fluxes. But that's how the cycle kind of works, the global water cycle. There's bodies of water, there's clouds, it rains, comes back down, makes its way through again to the oceans, and then this is the water cycle that we all depend on. And at the same time, this global water cycle provides us some very, very important services. It moves, stores, and renews water. It regulates the climate and the atmospheric moisture. It underpins our food systems and our ecosystems and our energy systems, and it sustains livelihoods and economies. So it's a very important part of the way that modern economies function. Now, unfortunately, as I show you at the bottom, probably you can't see all of it, unfortunately, but global warming and irresponsible land use is actually creating a lot of negative feedback loops that are hampering this global water cycle. Next slide, please. Something else that we discovered when we did this report is that actually there's a concept called flying rivers, which is basically a concept that says that there are many great forests of the world. And on the right-hand side, I'm showing you some of them. At the top, you see the Brazilian rainforest. In the middle, you see the forest of Congo. And at the bottom, which you probably can't see, other forests in Indonesia. And these forests play an incredibly important role in the global water cycle because the moisture that they produce actually finds its way through different parts of the world. And the green shades that you're seeing in these panels are basically showing you how the water that is generated by these forests makes its way across the world. This is called in the literature actually generating moisture across the world. And in that sense, they're a global public good. They are nature's water infrastructure. But unfortunately, this aspect of a global public good is largely missing from global water policy. Next slide, please. Now, one of the consequences of this global water cycle becoming hampered by climate change and wanton land use is that you're seeing water stress emerging in a lot of countries. And what we're showing you in this chart is the darker areas are countries where there's high population density and there's also a water stress problem. And you can see that Pakistan is right in the crosshairs of this. This has implications not just for your agricultural and food systems, but also it affects your sovereign ratings. And you can see that the impacts are increasingly uneven across the world. It's not as if the whole world is facing this kind of problem. The impacts and the risks are mostly concentrated in South Asia, Middle East and North Africa, East Asia, and the Pacific. Next slide, please. And this is just to show you that it's also impacting major crops of the world, in particular wheat, maize, but also cotton and rice are crops that are produced in basins with water stress of 80% or more. Next slide, please. Now, on the left-hand side, we're showing you which countries are major virtual water exporters, in the sense that most of their exports have a lot of water intensity in them. And you can see that Pakistan is right up there. It's actually number 4 in this chart. So Pakistan, even though it's a very water-stressed country, is also exporting a lot of water-intensive goods, in our case, rice and cotton. And at the bottom, although you can't see it, unfortunately, we show you that a large problem also is that water is not priced properly, particularly in countries that have water stress. And I wish you could see the chart at the bottom, but basically Pakistan is one country where water is so underpriced relative to the availability of water that it is almost off the charts in this scatter plot at the bottom. Next slide, please. The Himalayan glacier melt, which we've talked about in the panel, is of course a major problem, not just for Pakistan, but for 10 major rivers that it sustains, including the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Indus. And we're seeing that glacier loss is now contributing to, major flooding, and eventually it'll lead to droughts as well when the glaciers melt. And this affects about 240 million people directly, and 2 billion people more widely in the wider river basins. Next slide, please. And as I said at the beginning, unfortunately, overseas development assistance that is targeted towards water, which is what we're showing you on the left-hand side, the line is the absolute number, the blue bars are the share of total overseas development assistance. They've kind of been falling over the last 20 years. So we also need, at the same time, as we need to price water better and invest in infrastructure, we do need more overseas development assistance that is targeted towards water and water-stressed countries like Pakistan. Next slide, please. Finally, my last 3 slides. What do we do? What should the world do, given that this global water cycle is being destabilized? First of all, of course, you need hard infrastructure. You need to invest in irrigation, flood protection, storage, to protect against higher temperatures, glacier melts, and climate volatility. At the same time, you should also look at nature-based infrastructure, like upstream forests, wetlands, to support the global water cycle. But at the same time, investment in infrastructure alone is not enough. We also need to invest in governance. Next slide. And this slide, I won't go through it in much detail, but it's basically showing you that because water is an interconnected problem, and it has many levels of implementation, local, subnational, national, regional, and local, we do need to think about how to improve water governance by thinking about public investments more creatively, tariffs to price water better, improve national and local regulations. We also need multilateral development banks like my own to help countries, and we need the public and the private sector to work together to generate data of the kind that Professor Fugaza was showing us before. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. We also need to think about water as a system, not just as a sector. But as I said, because water is so interconnected, both in terms of soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure, and also forests and moisture and rain, we need to think a little bit more about managing water as a system and what that would entail. Next slide, please. And finally, these are some of the publications that have come out of my institution, the AIIB, in the last few years. Where the Water Flows is our latest report. You can get it online. And the last couple of years, we've also done some interesting reports on thinking about nature as infrastructure and financing it through the private sector. Let me then just end now with just a few lines from the book that I told you about at the beginning, Empires of the Indus, The Story of a River by Alice Albinia. I think it's quite evocative, but if you could just bear with me, I'll just read a few sentences from it. This book recounts a journey along the Indus, upstream and back in time, from the sea to the source, from the moment that Pakistan first came into being in Karachi to the time, millions of years ago, in Tibet, when the river itself was born. Along the way, the Indus River has had more names than its people have had dictators. Today, in spite of the militarized borders that divide the river's people from each other, the ancient interconnectedness of the Indus still prevails. From the deserts of Sindh to the mountains of Tibet, the Indus is worshipped by peasants and honored by poets. More than priests or politicians, it is the Indus that they revere. The mighty Indus of Sanskrit hymns and colonial tracts was heavily dammed during the 20th century, beginning with Britain's profit-driven colonization of the lower Indus Valley and extending through 60 years of army-dominated rule in Pakistan. Big dams have shackled the river, transforming the lives of human and non-human species on its banks and in its waters. Now, when I think of the Indus, I remember the eulogies of Sanskrit priests, Greek soldiers, and Sufi saints. Their words come down to us across the centuries, warning of all that there is to lose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for bringing the reality of water economics to life. With that, grateful to Dr. Saab for such an amazing session again, second of his day. I'd now like to move on towards session 5. Session 5 is agriculture, food security, and climate resilience. This session focuses on the intersection of agriculture, food security, and climate resilience, areas that are deeply interconnected and vital for Pakistan's future. It is my pleasure to first of all invite Dr. Zeelaf Munir, the chairperson of the Pakistan Business Council. She's also the managing director and chief executive officer of English Biscuits Manufacturers, to deliver the chairperson's address. Please, ma'am, if you could join us.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, good afternoon and assalamu alaikum. I come here today wearing multiple hats as the head of EBM, who have partnered with the Dawn Media Group from the very beginning, believing in the criticality of this topic. As chairperson of the Pakistan Business Council, to highlight the role and responsibility of the private sector of Pakistan, and as patron of the Pakistan Agriculture Coalition, who are doing commendable work in this field, and above all, as a concerned Pakistani citizen. All those hats, one concern: the future of food in Pakistan. We meet at a point of reckoning. Across the world, food systems are buckling. A pandemic shook our supply chains. The war in Ukraine pulled wheat out of the global market. The war in Iran has raised fuel prices and tightened fertilizer supply. And above it all, through it all, climate change has been the quiet, relentless force that grows, that determines what grows, where it grows, and whether it grows at all. Now, let's turn our gaze home. Ask ourselves a simple question. Which sector of our economy is most vulnerable to climate change? The answer is agriculture. In 2022, the Indus broke its banks and broke our hearts. 80% of Sindh's rice crop, gone. 80% of its cotton, gone. Both blows to our exports. That same year, a historic heat wave wilted our wheat fields and forced us to import. Draining the foreign exchange we can least afford to lose. Last autumn, the rain on our eastern border swallowed more than 6% of Punjab's farmland. These are not freak events anymore. This is the new climate of our country. Ask any farmer, they will tell you the seasons no longer arrive on time. They are wandering across the calendar. Pakistan's agriculture is not facing a future crisis from climate change. It is living one right now. When policymakers in Pakistan think about food security, they think of one word, wheat. And rightly so. Wheat puts the calories on our table. Wheat is the staple of our staples. We at English Biscuit know a thing or two about wheat. We know it from the field to the factory. And here is what we have come to understand. We are the world's largest, 8th largest wheat producer, and yet we import it. Well, let that sink in with us. We are amongst the top 8 producers, and yet we have to now import. The harder truth is this: climate change is outpacing our grains in yield. At current population growth rates, Pakistan could import millions of tons of wheat in the coming decade if we do not move faster. Cotton tells the story of exports we cannot make. Wheat tells the story of imports we cannot afford, and citizens who can no longer afford to eat. But here is what I most want you to take home today. Food security is not made on the farm alone. It is made or lost in the supply chains that follow. Last summer in Punjab, 12 spells of rain fell between mid-June and the end of August, right when the corn harvest was coming to markets. Our mandis had no modern warehousing to speak of. The corn rotted, prices climbed, millers turned to wheat to make poultry feed. Wheat prices climbed too, and it all ended predictably in tears with government raids and impoundments from across the province. This is what climate change looks like when it collides with a supply chain that was never modernized. And let us never forget the people who keep the system alive. The back-breaking work of our farms is done in great measure by women. Of Pakistan's 30 million agricultural labor, women are not a minority. They are the backbone. On the other end of the chain, Pakistanis are already going hungry. Just last week, the FAO and the World Food Programme's Global Report on Food Crises 2026 named Pakistan among the top 10 countries facing acute food insecurity. Within the top 10. Food insecurity was once the burden of the poorest. It still is. But with war on our doorstep and climate at our windows, it is fast becoming a question for every Pakistani. And 44% of us live below the poverty line. I have laid out the challenges. Now let me speak of our blessings. This is a land of 5 rivers, and beneath them the Indus aquifer. When the surface fails us, the aquifer sustains us. This is a land of 60 million acres of arable soil. Every season, every agroclimatic zone, from the snow line to the desert. And above all, this is the land of our farmers. Their grit, their ingenuity, their deep wisdom of soil and sky passed down through generations. We cannot fail a country so blessed. We cannot fail farmers so steadfast. So with all of this, the rivers, the land, the seasons, the farmers, the question almost asks itself. Why have we not seized this? Why are we not the breadbasket of the region? Why are we not attracting investments from across Asia? The answer is uncomfortable, but it must be said. Our political economy is holding us back. And nowhere is this clearer than in the chain that stands between the farmer and the market. A small landholder in Pakistan often captures only a fraction of the final retail price of the wheat he grows, or whatever he grows. The rest is taken by a long chain of intermediaries. The commission agents in our mandis, the middlemen who set the price he receives at the harvest, sometimes the same person who lent him the money for seed and now dictates what he must give him insurance. None of it will change his life if the structure that captures the value he creates remains untouched. The mindset that protects this structure is what has held Pakistani agriculture back for decades. It is the reason the farmer remains poor while the supply chain prospers. It is the reason capital does not flow to the farm. And it is the first thing that has to change. This calls for introspection, for honest analysis, for courageous actions. So what do? It begins where it must always begin, with the farmer. We cannot reverse the climate alone, but we can equip our farmers to live with it. A very informative presentation was given earlier by Ms. Iram on water management and the role of the farmer. And I found that to be really very, very enlightening. And this is exactly what she was also referring to in her presentation on water management. So how do we help? First, better seeds. Heat-resistant hybrid corn has already reached our farmers. What we must do is do this for every crop. And that requires a regulatory regime that welcomes, not strangles, the private sector that delivers those seeds to the field. Second, crop insurance. The vast majority of our farmers are smallholders. They cannot afford the premiums. The government must pay it for them, as governments do around the world. Our neighbor to the east has paid out over $20 billion to nearly 200 million farmer applications in the last 9 years. This is one of the highest return investments available to a country in our position. Third, credit. Our banks have long been shy of farmers, but the government of Punjab's Kisan card with a 30% first loss guarantee and now the state bank's Zarkhez program with a 10% first loss guarantee from the federal government, these are the foundations to build on. And let us build those. The fourth, water. Pakistan puts 93% of its fresh water into agriculture and recovers far less than it should. Field trials in Punjab show drip irrigation in citrus orchards deliver a 105% yield increase with 50% water savings. The technology exists, the field evidence is there in Pakistan. The blocker has been deployment, not affordability. Fifth and most important, technology. Artificial intelligence and satellite data must be harnessed responsibly to deliver hyperlocal weather advisories, market prices, pest warnings, irrigation guidance, and credit scoring. All of it on a farmer's phone. All of it in time to act. And beyond the farm, the supply chain. Even if we grow enough, can we store enough? Can we move enough? Can we secure enough? Look to our neighbor to the east. They launched a multi-year national program to build foundational grain storage and logistics, anchored by private capital and private execution. Pakistan must do the same. And finally, a word to those who hold the levers of policy. Progress requires trust. Trust of the farmer, who must not wake up wondering if the government will abandon him. Trust of the private sector, which cannot live under the constant perils of raids upon its premises. Trust of the banks, which must feel safe lending to those who feed us. We heard from our esteemed ministers and panelists the gap between funding that can be tapped into to the outcomes needed is bankable plans, projects, and execution. And this is where the private sector comes in. With our discipline of execution, we are best placed to lead the transformation of the agri-food sector in the face of the perils of the climate change. The private sector needs to step up. The public sector, policymakers, and regulators need to give them the space to deliver rather than hinder them. Our last great triumph in agriculture was the Green Revolution, and it was not just about the seed. It was about the whole ecosystem: seed, irrigation, fertilizer, roads, and the empowerment of the farmer. In that era, the government led, the private sector followed. Today, the moment calls for the reverse. Let the private sector take the wheel. Let the government lead from behind, setting the policy, shaping the regulation, holding the framework steady so that our farmers can feed not only this nation, but help feed the world. We have the rivers, we have the land, we have the seasons, we have the farmers, we have the well. What remains is to act. Thank you very much.